The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
Welcome, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. I've got a great show lined up for tonight, and I think you're really going to like it. So if you do have questions tonight, private chat them to either Ceiling Cat or myself, Henry Foister, and we will get those answered for you. If you're listening from somewhere else around the world, you can also, if you don't want to come over to the chat room, which is at paraxradionetwork.com, and just click on join the chat and you'll be in. Or you can send us a message to the paranormalview@gmail.com and we will get those answered. So tonight we got a great show. We got with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everybody.
And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we have also a guest co-host tonight. Actually, he's almost just like a member. Thomas Wertman.
Hello, hello. I'm the family member you can't get rid of.
And Jeff, I'm going to let you introduce our real guest tonight.
Okay. Well, tonight we have, I just updated it without knowing co-host duties, but we have returning guests Preston Dennett and Thomas Wertman. Preston is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and Thomas is the director of MUFON Ohio. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. And Thomas has been here so often that our listeners all know who he is by heart. So welcome back, Preston Dennett and Thomas Wertman.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
All right. I had to mute the chat button up on top.
Oh.
I'm good now. We're squared away.
Oh. We're fine talking.
All right. Everybody is ready to go now, I hope.
Preston's new book is called Onboard UFO Encounters. It's true accounts of contact with extraterrestrials. And we were talking before the show started, I've read a lot of UFO abduction books, well, a lot of paranormal books in general, but this is one of the creepiest storytelling books that I think I've read in a really long time. Not just from the encounters, but also the psychological encounters, the conversations that were occurring between the extraterrestrials and the abductees. Did you find that it was just a little odd with how they were interacting with humans?
Yeah, I find this whole phenomena odd. So that's kind of a trick question. Because, I've been studying this for a pretty long time, and I've written a number of books on UFOs. This one is all about people who've had very extensive contact, and I really enjoyed digging into it because this, I think, is where we get our most of our information. And like one guy I interviewed, he's now 73. He's had encounters since he's 5 years old. So it's a lifetime of experiences. And he's gotten a lot of information. Some people get more, very little information. There's one case in the book. The only thing the ETs ever said to the guy was, "Don't be afraid. we won't hurt you. Come with us. So I hear that a lot.
It's not like we have candy come into our spaceship-sized van.
Yeah, it's definitely the most common thing. They say, we won't hurt you, which isn't always true.
It's going to hurt you the more than it hurts us.
Generally speaking, it is. I mean, people are returned. And I have to say, I've been thinking about this for a long time. The whole kidnapping aspect of UFO encounters is pretty darn disturbing. That's a crime on any part of our planet, pretty much. And yet, when someone gets kidnapped on Earth, it really never ends well. But if into a UFO, yeah, usually people are returned. And honestly, people are often transformed for the better in some way, whether being physically healed or psychically awakened or given warnings of some kind. So there's that. I'm not saying that's an excuse for kidnapping somebody. Don't get me wrong.
Well, now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I just don't think this is necessarily an overtly hostile phenomenon.
Yeah, not hostile so much, but the conversations were, if you look at a doctor-patient relationship sometimes, and even in a clinic or in an asylum, that's almost the type of dialogue they were having with the abductees. It was very clinical, almost like a doctor would talk to a patient.
Yeah, certainly. I think in most cases, there's some sort of condescension, perhaps, and not the best bedside manners in a few of these cases.
That's true.
But not all of them. I mean, there's the case of Lynette. Her case fascinates me. There's a young girl who had monsters coming out of her closet from a very young age. Called her father. He'd come running in with a shotgun and, of course, wouldn't find anything. But as she grew up, she started having missing time and things like this. She had missing time at age 13. As a young woman, she had missing pregnancies. And pretty, realized around this time that something was going on with her in terms of UFOs and this sort of thing.
This is the one that had 4 pregnancies, and the doctors were telling her they were absorbed.
Yeah, well, she knew they weren't. At some point it becomes clearer because she's, being pulled on board and being asked to hold a little hybrid baby. She was diagnosed with a tumor in her lung. This is in 1994 as an adult, and was about to have, a quarter of her lung removed. And the ETs pulled her on board and healed her. And doctors, of course, were very baffled and actually upset. But my favorite part of all of her experiences, I'm still in touch with her. In 2011, she had an extraordinary experience where she's pulled out into her living room. These are your typical grays. She says the wall opens up like levelor blinds. It's just gone. She's pulled up into a craft. It reminded her very much of, the inside of it. It reminded her of being inside a submarine with sort of these metal walls and rounded port or doors. And she got an examination, and they took her into this room and showed her hybrid babies and a lot of stuff we hear quite a bit. And at one point he says, I'm your son. I'm your full-grown son. And as she realized that, that was true, she could see resemblance. But at any rate, he told her a bunch of messages, actually, which were really fascinating. One was that a warning to not eat meat. They said it's very important that you tell people do not eat meat. I found that fascinating. And they also said that you must tell people that greed and negativity is going to destroy them if they're not careful. What they actually told her is, we are all interconnected. The power of intention is real. Thought is real. And if we don't stop putting out the greed and negativity we're putting out, we're going to kill our own race. So that was...
is that the same one where her husband was trying to poison her?
No, that case is actually very similar in a lot of ways.
That's what I thought. I was trying to remember. Did I read that?
No. This one is of Lynette, and she's had a lot of these missing pregnancies, which is kind of, I think, the main difference. Though Dolly, the one you're talking about, also had missing pregnancies and a full-grown hybrid son who came into her kitchen. But just going back to Lynette's story, there's some very interesting things they told her. They said that they don't have emotions, and that's been bred out of them, but they're trying to breed them back in. That's something I've heard many times. They told her that there's a huge earthquake fault in Missouri leading south through the center of the U.S., which at some point will probably go off. They've predicted a lot more hurricanes. Katrina had hit not too long ago when this experience happened. They told her, this I thought was interesting, they said that people have mistaken them for angels throughout history. And they said, we are who you thought angels are. I don't know if that's true, but
sorry, I was going to say, do they insert? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
One more thing, because it's just so bizarre, is they told her that they have manipulated the genetics of not only people, but animals, and particularly dogs and cats, to make them more emotionally available, or, how did they put it? More able to interact with people.
Really?
Yes.
Which you don't say.
Which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because ETs are all about Earth and everything human. They're collecting plants, and they're abducting animals. There's all kinds of cases where they've pulled up cows and pigs and rabbits and chickens and alligators. I know of a case involving alligators.
Whoops.
Wait, they've abducted alligators?
Yes. Yeah, they sure have. Yeah,
no, they are the last of the dinosaurs. So.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Well, the point is they're studying everything about our planet and us. So if they're manipulating, and they're all about genetics too. So I don't know how much intervention they're having on humanity and the world itself, but it looks like there's.
Well, I don't. Yeah, my suspicion is what's going on in this world. It's possible we have more life than some of these other planets do, and they're just like, whoa, this place is, rocking with stuff.
Yeah, that's something that I would love to find more information about. NASA said they found Earth-like worlds, but if you dig into NASA, they've got a whole UFO conspiracy that's they're neck deep in it.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm not sure how much information we can trust from them, but really all we know is Earth. That's all we know. There are cases of people being taken to possibly other planets, but we don't really know much about that.
Don't have the proof.
Well,
Yeah.
Consider.
Jeff, you're breaking up. Okay. How do you get all your stories? Do people send them to you?
And so, of course,
Jeff, you're breaking up.
I'm not saying anything.
Well, somebody sounded like you. Trying anyway. So how do you get all your stories? Do people send them to you, and do you interview them?
A variety of ways. Some through my website. Some have read my books. Some hear me on, shows like this one. Some are referred through family or friends. Occasionally someone at work has an experience. So really a wide variety of ways. One of the stories in the book, for example, I worked at the Renaissance Fair for a year. My sister worked there for years and years. And one of the guys there, Tony, found out I was a UFO investigator. He was my sister's friend, and I got to know him. He's like, "Oh, you're into UFOs? Oh, I've got to tell you this story." It was a story, he'd been dying to tell somebody. So that was one way. So a wide variety of ways, really.
Well, Thomas, you got questions? Maybe?
Let me turn my mic back on.
Oh, I was wondering where you was at.
No, I was being real quiet. I was just letting everybody go first, No, I was. When you're talking about getting some of the stories, I mean, it's doing investigations like I do of MUFON. There's times that you get these individuals who come up and say, "Hey, I saw these lights in the sky I can't explain," and when you talk to them, and you really break the ice, then all of a sudden some of these other stories come out. And I saw some of the blurbs on your book on there, Preston, and one of them was about a nurse who saw the cover of the book Communion. And then she recognized something happened, from that picture. And that kind of reminds me of the first case I ever did of MUFON, where it wasn't, in this case, the witness. But the witness's son, who's only 3 years old, came up carrying a book, the book Communion, and goes, "Mommy, this is a guy who took us through the window last night."
Oh, wow.
And when you get these stories like that, that's why I've got to get your book and read more about, the stories in there to see, I'm looking for similarities. And that's one thing that I look for. And when you do investigations, talk to these witnesses that have these abduction cases, are you looking for like the normal stuff, or what do you look for that's kind of unusual that you don't hear all the time from other cases?
Yeah, well, what I found is if you improved my interview techniques over the years, and if you let people talk, you make sure that they feel comfortable. You assure them, you're not going to use their name if they don't want it used, and gain their trust. And they start to tell you what really happened. And I found that the UFO phenomena is really a lot stranger than I thought. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because each time you think, you're like, well, I think I've got a handle on this. Along comes a story that's just shocking. I mean, there's a case in the book. Pat Cates is her name. She's born in 1943. And like a lot of these people who have extensive experiences, hers started at a very young age 5, actually. She had gone to the circus and was staying with her grandparents and had just gone to bed on the second story of, their home when she saw this face looking through the window. Her immediate thought was something must have followed her home from the circus, but she now recognizes it as the typical gray, a bald head, really weird eyes. She remembers this. Runs downstairs, tells her grandparents, and they're like, "Listen, you're on the second floor. There's no way. It must have been your imagination." So that was her first experience. Later, as a young child, she was playing behind the house in the little forest there, and the whole forest blazed with light. She had missing time. She thought, she didn't know what had happened. Started having dreams about UFOs being on board, examined this sort of thing. She grew up, became a waitress. She was also an aspiring actress, but really made her money doing waitressing. And kept having missing time with her best friend. They'd be driving, and wake up on the side of the road. So a lot of weird stuff going on, and sort of your typical experiences in a lot of ways. One day she did come home and saw 3 grays, or some figures very much like grays, standing in her living room. She almost laughed out loud because one of them, she says, "I swear this is true," was wearing a pinstripe suit.
Oh, wow.
And I found that fascinating because that's something Whitley Strieber described. He had that same experience. I know of a couple of other people. It's very rare, but it's one of those weird details. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. I'm like, "Well, what did you think of that?" And she says, "Well, I thought they put it on to sort of alleviate the fear, reduce the fear factor." And she says, "It worked." So
maybe he was going to ask her to alien prom.
Sounds.
If that was a seersucker suit, that would be my sister's ex-husband. It wasn't an alien.
Well, it sounds like the alien version of Men in Black.
It's weird,
Kind of.
you know.
Yeah, but it's interesting that multiple people are coming up with the same type of thread, and it almost seems like you can track detail like that through different abduction stories.
Yeah, it's what I call sort of a red flag. It's little known details that are fairly consistent, that are, you know, kind of a corroboration from completely separate people who have no idea of each other. So it's always like, wow, you know, like one guy told me the room, I asked him, how big was this room you were in? He said, honestly, I couldn't tell you because it kept changing sizes. I'm like, you're kidding. He's like, no, it was like 50 feet. And then at one point it was easily 200 feet across. And that was another one of those things I hear every now and then from witnesses who are trying to describe how big a UFO is. This happened to Joe Gardner. He's one of the cases in this book. Mm-hmm. They came up into a large room. He's like, it didn't even look like a room. It looked like a warehouse. And mind you, the object he had gone inside was maybe 20 or 50 feet across. So there's weird details that provide, I think, corroboration.
That's the things that interest me, Preston, is when you get stories like that, because you'll hear somebody talk about describing UFO. Well, it's like the Phoenix Lights. Well, they're pulling out things that they can kind of identify with, but I look at those unique things. And just picking up something you were talking about, the circus. Now, you said the girl came back from the circus. I've had two witnesses, both in their younger age, like under 10 and slightly over 10, that told me that when the aliens took them, they took them to a circus. And these two girls were completely separate from each other, didn't know anything about it. And I heard those stories, and it just really, like, wow. But it also goes back to a point you made of maybe creating an environment that's not as scary.
Yeah,
especially to a child.
Exactly. This actually goes back to another book I wrote, not from here. I put a chapter in called The Alien Clown Connection, because what you're talking about is really ringing some bells for me. I had a lady who insisted that she had this harlequin appear in her room as a little girl, and it wasn't a clown at all. It was a gray, kind of dressed up as a clown, physically dressed up as a clown. And then I had a second case like that. And I'm like, wow. I started looking into it, and Bud Hopkins has had a number of cases like this. There's some cases in England, same type of thing. And these are not like screen memories. These are like aliens dressed up as clowns to sort of, I think, reduce the fear factor.
Oh,
and
they should pick something else, because a lot of people are afraid of clowns.
Yeah, and they so come dressed as spiders, and there you go.
Or maybe that's why they're afraid of clowns.
That's possible.
I went to a UFO group, and I'm like, how do you guys feel about clowns? You know, a UFO support group for people who've been taken on board. And I'm like, how do you guys feel about clowns? And everyone just erupted and started screaming. They did not like clowns, universally. It's called chlorophobia, fear of clowns.
Yeah, chlorophobia, yeah.
Yeah, it's very prevalent in society, and I'm wondering why. And I think the aliens, honestly, have used it as a device to sort of try to reduce the fear factor, and it's backfired on them. Because now, people are terrified of clowns. It's a question I ask. You know, how do you feel about clowns when I'm interviewing somebody?
Interesting. But, you know, it's also those really weird pieces of information that you would never associate with abductions, like a pinstripe suit. You know, little things that, most people would never, if they were trying to drum up a story, for example, probably would ever think to include in it.
Yeah, there's certain things that are very consistent in terms of what it's like inside a UFO on board one. People generally describe rounded rooms, no even seams, like it's all molded out of one piece. That's fairly common. Indirect lighting, that's pretty much universal. No one sees lamps, shining with light bulbs. It's funny to hear some of the witnesses describe this because, they've never read a UFO book. They don't know these details. And he's like, I couldn't tell you where the light was coming from. This is a guy from the Netherlands I interviewed. He's like, I honestly don't know. It was like it was just shining in through the window. So that's a detail. Another is the control panels, perhaps, which are usually described as simple with colored lights and oven dial type things. Another would be the windows people look out, and they don't look out windows. Almost always, they don't see, a window frame or anything like that. Instead, a portion of the wall turns transparent. Often it's a little oval shape. Sometimes it's much larger. Sometimes it's the entire craft. I had a couple of people say, it was like being inside Wonder Woman's jet. And that's a weird detail that I don't think is super well known.
I had one of those, Preston.
Originally an aspect of Travis Walton's.
Yeah. I had one a number of years ago where the witness described an object coming out of Lake Erie. And he said the object rose out of Lake Erie and came over. There's actually a Ford plant in that region, and the Ford plant at that time happened to be on strike. This goes back to like the 70s, something like that. And the object came over him, and he says he shined one of his old 5-cell flashlights at it. And he says it looked like it was almost transparent. He says it looked like the light was hitting a surface, but he could also see the stars through it.
Wow.
Yep, I've heard that in other cases. These things can sometimes move through solid objects, forests, trees, into the ground. I've had a number of cases that, certainly in and out of the water, yeah. I do know that Lake Erie has got, a lot of activity there. Certainly I've heard other cases from that area. Yeah, it's a fascinating phenomenon when you see these sort of commonalities. But then again, each case has its unique elements. Like, probably one of the most shocking cases, honestly, was I was getting to it with Pat. This is the lady who walked into her living room and saw this gray alien in a pinstripe suit. So she had this weird experience. This is on November 13th, 1985. And she wakes up and she's not on board a UFO. She's standing next to one. And it feels like it's, early morning. She's not sure. Certainly daylight. And she's looking over this small town. It looks South American. There's kind of lush foliage. It's a village. And she's trying to figure out where she is and what's going on. There's a human figure standing next to her in a blue suit. There's a very large UFO. There's grays milling around. Another very large UFO just a few hundred yards off. And she's somehow made to understand, she doesn't know how, that they're going to go into this village and collect people. And that's what they did for the next 3 hours. She says they went into this town and pulled people out of their homes and started bringing them into this UFO. People followed them like sheep. Nobody asked any questions. Everyone was very obedient. She said it was all very strange until they had collected maybe 1,000 people, she said. I'm like, 1,000? She said, well, it could have been 500, 2,000, I don't know. There was another big craft, so a lot of people. And these craft lift up at some point, and there's this huge explosion. And it's a volcano that has exploded, apparently, and it comes sweeping down, and it covers this town. It buries it. So it was a horrific scene of, this wave of mud coming over just houses and trees and chunks of ice and bodies. It was very scary for her. The UFO dipped down, picked a few more people up. Next thing she knows, she's being placed back on her driveway. This is in Louisiana, I believe, or Florida, somewhere around there. And she goes back to bed, wakes up the next morning, and calls her best friend. She's like, I had one of my UFO dreams, and it's a weird one. Listen to this. starts telling her friend, she says, Pat, hang up the phone right now and turn on the TV. So Pat does and turns on the TV, and there's her, quote, dream being played out on literally every channel. Turned out the Nevada Del Ruiz volcano had just exploded in Colombia and buried the town of Amero and killed some 27,000 people.
Wow.
So apparently saved some of them. I'm like, what do you think happened to those people? She says, I couldn't tell you. They couldn't be returned back to Earth. That would raise all kinds of questions. I'm thinking they were rescued. That's what she thinks, but it was still very traumatic. She ended up seeing a therapist about it. She had PTSD. No kidding.
Well, that could almost go a couple ways. You can almost think that, well, did they know by some means that volcano eruption was going to happen and thought this is a good way to take people without them being noticed or gone?
Yeah, I wonder about it. I have to tell you, I have looked into cases that are similar, where people have been helped, perhaps. I did a book called The Healing Power of UFOs, which looked into physiological healings. But what I found is a number of cases of what I'm going to call just outright UFO benevolence, where they intervene in people's lives to save their lives. And a good example is some guys driving through Colorado late at night on a highway, and a UFO appears ahead of him and sends down this beam of light right onto the road, and there's a mattress on the road in front of his car. He has just enough time to swerve, and basically he feels this UFO saved his life. Another case very similar, where a lady was prevented from having a car accident. Another case involving some kids who were out in the Nevada desert and had a UFO actually lift their pickup truck up out of the sand where it was stuck and put it back on the road, which may sound outrageous, but it's called a car lift case, and I know of at least 20 cases where cars have been lifted up. So
Wow.
There's a pattern to some of these cases. Pat's case, I have to say, is the only case I know of where allegedly thousands of people have been saved, but there was another one from Artie Six Killer Clark, who's put out a series of really wonderful books where a UFO hovered over this town in South America during a hurricane and saved it from hurricane force winds.
Yeah, we've had her on the show before. It's been a few years, but we've had her on the show.
Yeah, I love her books. I think you're getting a more accurate sort of worldview of the UFO phenomena. And you can see that it's not just all about abductions and hybrid babies. A lot of very interesting things are happening that aren't being talked about.
But do you find that when people are abducted, that it happens more than once to them?
Yeah, I would say that that's a general rule. That's not always true. I mean, true. Sometimes can be in a one-off, so to speak, but absolutely, I think if someone's having an onboard experience, very likely they have certainly a UFO history of some kind, sightings, usually abductions. But, there's the case of Ron Chernin from, let me see, this was Kensington, Pennsylvania. He's a teenager. He's out with his two friends at 7 p.m. one night, and they're getting ready to go home because they have a curfew, or his two friends do. Ron can stay out, as late as he wants, really. And they're all about to go home and, say goodbye. They're right next to Ron's house. Look up, and there's this classic flying saucer. It says it was a beautiful metallic disc. It had a bright red light on the bottom, shining like a big bike reflector. And this porthole appears, and there's two human-looking beings, or silhouettes at least, looking down at him. He waves at them, they wave back, and he's just filled with this desire to go on board. He's kind of like begging them mentally, take me on board. So the next thing he realizes, he's facing the other direction. he's watching this UFO depart. He's got this real feeling of poignant sorrow as this UFO takes off and leaves. He's kind of waving goodbye, and so are they. And his friends freak out because now it's 10 o'clock. So, right? Somehow it's already 10. So they run home. They both get in trouble. He goes home and tells his mom what happened. And she's like, wow, that's amazing. He says, I don't know, but I don't know what happened during those 3 hours. And she didn't know what to make of it until the next morning. He wakes up. He's still pretty upset. Goes to his friend's house, and they don't remember seeing any UFO. Neither of them remember seeing anything. So that upset him really bad. He returns home and says, Mom, I know I saw something. And she's like, I know you did. Look at the newspaper. It had just arrived, and sure enough, a bunch of people in town saw UFOs in their neighborhood, in that town, Kensington. So that was certainly validation for him. But over the next few weeks, he actually remembered what happened during those 3 hours. He recalled actually being taken on board. He was sitting on this low bench. There was 2 adults, one sitting on each side of him. They appeared to be comatose or non-reacting. He tried to ask them questions. They did not respond. But looking across the room, he could see 2, I guess you would call them Nordics. I don't really like that term. Human-looking ETs. He said they were very beautiful. The man had, I forget the color of his hair. I believe it was blonde, with blue eyes. The woman had brown hair, brown eyes. And he said they were just beautiful. I mean, he got the feeling these guys were perfect human beings, angelic even. They were wearing jumpsuits. They didn't really talk much, but smiled at him. They showed him, they were operating the console there. They took him across the room, took him to another side of this object, and a porthole opened up, and he saw a field of stars. Doesn't remember a whole lot more than that at this point, and has returned. But for him, it was, a one-off. This is the only time he recalls ever being taken on board. Following this, he did have a number of very close-up sightings. So has his family. And it's continuing. It's ongoing. I talked to him recently. I don't know. Usually, yeah, people have repeated experiences, but not always. It does seem to follow families. That's for sure.
Do you think, or do you find through these stories that they're open to people being inquisitive about the ship, the beings, etc.? How open are they? I mean, some of your stories, they actually go, do you want to go see Saturn? Do you want to see this place? Do you want to see that place? And I'm wondering just how open they are to questions.
Yeah, not always particularly open to kids, certainly. Kids seem to have a better time with this and not so much fear. The case I think you're referencing is that of Joe Gardner, who's this really wonderful man from West Virginia, and from Huntington, West Virginia. He had a sighting with his mom over the grocery store when he was just like 4 years old. A few months later, he and his whole family is going to go blackberry picking, which they do, and had just crossed the border into Kentucky and were looking for the blackberry bushes that they knew were there. When they came upon what they thought was a house, the father goes, look, guys, it's a spaceship house. And it was this giant disc on very tall stilts. But it was the size of a house, so that's what they assumed it was. And Joe, little Joe, he's super excited and begs his dad to turn around so they can look at this thing. And finally, he just wouldn't stop, so they turned around, pulled a U-turn, and pulled off the highway and looked at this thing. There's no driveway. This thing is kind of nestled among the trees, 100 yards perhaps off of the road. And Joe and his father, also named Joe Sr., walk up to this thing. And they can see there's no wires, there's no windows. It's just got like 3 or 4 landing legs. It's huge, 50 feet across perhaps, metallic. Joe walks up to one of the landing legs and feels it, and it's cold. And his father, who can reach sort of the top there, is knocking on this thing with his fist when a portal opens up. Yeah, a portal opens up. It's funny because I've heard people say, I wish one of these things would just land. I could knock on it and go in. Well, that's precisely what happened in this case. So it was, at this point, they're not thinking UFO. They're thinking it's an energy house of some kind, with solar panels perhaps, not understanding. And they look up, and there's this kind of scrawny arm with 3 fingers. This is what little Joe sees. His father doesn't see this at all. His father sees a normal person. So what happens is a little ladder-type device comes down, and they climb up it. He says it was a flimsy little thing. They pulled inside this craft, or this room. He said, and here's where it starts to get strange. It's all rounded corners, indirect lighting, all the things we normally hear. And little Joe, looks up and sees this figure is not a man. It's a bug-eyed, bug man with big eyes. It looks like an ant, sort of. And he's like, that man looks like a bug. And his father's like, stop being rude. This man invited us into his house and starts having a conversation with this figure. And he's like very interested in the power source. And this bug man, quote, starts showing his father, how they get power. And it evolves into this long sort of involved. It's a very strange case. Joe ends up walking to this table, sort of pedestal, and drinks this weird bitter liquid, which causes him to black out. He wakes up, and he's being physically examined. It was very painful. And then this sort of female gray comes. She's very friendly, very nurturing, pulls him from the table and shows him his family. And they're all being examined in some way. He starts to get really upset, and she's like, don't worry, everything's fine. They're just being examined. They're just fine. And she takes him on a tour. She's like, would you like to see the ship? And takes him around to the upper level. And she's floating. She can just float around, and he has to walk up this sort of ramp that goes around this sort of central column. That's another thing I hear a number of witnesses describing as this central column. And they go up to the upper level of the craft, which has an obsidian black floor. And it opens up like a dome, and he can see all this huge star field. And the female Gray's like, isn't this beautiful? And he's like, wow, okay, yeah, stars. Didn't think it was all that interesting. But yeah, he was one of the people who was given a tour. And later on, as a 13-year-old, had a very similar experience where he was again pulled on board a UFO. And this time they actually let him sit in the control seat. They told him how to operate the craft, which he did. They took him on a tour. He saw Saturn. He recognized it from his astronomy books. And I know how this may sound to, skeptics, but I have to tell you, I know other people who have had the same exact thing happen, given a tour. This happened to Raymond Fowler, who investigated Betty Andreasen's case. He was pulled on board a UFO as a child, and they took him and showed him Saturn. It's a thing they do, especially to kids. It was a very friendly case initially.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say Saturn always has a familiar ring to it.
That case was interesting because also, I'm not sure if it was him or his father was saying that when they got back to their car or were put back in their car, it was like somebody changed a television screen. So it had that almost instantaneous, you're awake, you're not.
Yeah, there's a weird time aspect to this. Lynette described this. She was pulled from her house once, and she's floating over the driveway and the road near her up into a UFO. She's like freaking out. She's kind of got a fear of heights. I'm like, don't worry, you won't fall. You won't fall. They were repeating it to her. You'll be fine, you won't fall. And she looks down on the road, and there's 6 cars, headlights blazing, but they're stopped. They're not moving. In fact, nothing is moving. It's as if time has stopped. And, I've got other cases just like this. People say, well, it's like nobody was moving. My dad wasn't moving, and this sort of thing. And I'm wondering, okay, is time actually stopped? I mean, you can't stop time in the entire universe. That's just, I can't even.
Do you ever hear anything from people that might be in one of those cars that say they've seen a UFO, but they it's like missing time or something because I guess had been stopped?
No, and I would love to. I'm guessing the people in the car see a UFO fly by at normal speed. And that what's happening from inside the UFO is they're being pulled out of our time stream. Because you can't stop the entire universe. Just can't.
Sure. We can't.
I'm not ready to believe that. Let me put it that way. I think because there was another case where a guy I interviewed, he's now a chiropractor. This is up in the Missouri area. Described the same thing. He was out with his whole family, and a UFO appeared, and he's looking at it, and suddenly it disappears. He's looking around trying to find it, and it's landed on the driveway right in his house, and he looks at his family, and they're all frozen. The leaves are frozen on the tree. The birds are frozen, and everything's frozen except him. He can move. And these 3 grays are coming down the driveway towards him. That's when he blacks out. But it's that same thing where these grays are stopping time.
Well, that was something that I'd wondered too. Like, there's many abductions where they say an alien was outside my window or a spaceship was hovering over the house and it took them. Is there ever a reported case where someone else from the neighborhood happened to see this UFO there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a number of what I would call observed abduction cases. The Brooklyn Bridge case is a very well-known incident. That one was investigated by Bud Hopkins, and there was a whole group of witnesses who saw the lady pulled out of her apartment building. But it's not a unique case. There was a case up in England where a bunch of people saw a gentleman pulled out of Roundhay Park. They saw him get pulled up and saw him get put back. There's another case in Brazil where a family watched their father get abducted, and he was not returned.
Wow.
Another case just like that in Hobbs, New Mexico. That's from Leonard Stringfield, a good researcher, who said this this farmer came driving this pickup truck, screeching into the driveway because there was a UFO hovering overhead, and his whole family watches as he's pulled up into this object and never seen again.
Wow. So Thomas, have you heard of cases like that?
I've heard of cases where some of the same ones that Preston was talking about. And then I've had some cases where individuals turn reports in describing things similar. And sometimes I'm in the back of my mind thinking, is this something that really happened to them, or are they kind of reading into maybe somebody else's case, something that happened to somebody else, and drawing from it? And sometimes just a little bit of a challenge, just trying to separate some of the ones I've come across.
Yeah, I think those are outliers. That sort of thing doesn't happen a lot. Like the case of Lieutenant Felix Moncla over Lake Superior, who was vectored to a UFO and was on radar, and his blip merged with the UFO, and they never saw Lieutenant Felix Moncla again. We don't know what happened to him. Apparently he was permanently abducted. So,
the question I had, though, is, you're talking about some of the different races of aliens. When they do abductions, these different groups, do they have kind of like separate agendas on what they're looking for?
I think there are multiple agendas, and because people describe different accounts. Certainly one agenda that I see quite a bit is this genetic agenda. Bud Hopkins was, I think, among the first to say, listen, they're hybridizing with us and creating hybrid babies. I have to tell you, I was getting the very first case I got involving, first-hand contact with grays and abductions had that aspect where there was hybrid babies shown, a whole baby presentation. And that is an agenda I still see. I've got cases I'm working on right now with people who said that they were involved with this sort of experience. So that, I would say, is definitely a main agenda among the grays. But certainly another thing I see quite a bit, and this crosses sort of races in terms of grays, human-looking, mantids, or whatever, and that is being given warnings of some kind, like Lynette was. They told her we need to going to destroy our planet unless we stop putting out so much greed and negativity. Another guy, a Navy medic, he was literally shown all these disasters that would happen to our planet, and was told it was because of our atomic testing. And so that's a pretty common thing. They seem to be very intent on warning people, particularly about nuclear proliferation and pollution in our warlike ways. So that definitely an agenda. Another one I would say would be because they take people to the control room. This is fairly common, and it's weird because why would they be doing this? And they start explaining to people how the craft works. And generally speaking, it's some aspect of electromagnetism. And they tell people, you don't need to use fossil fuels, and there's other energy sources available. So I think they're really trying to wake people up in a number of different ways. And the very prominent pattern I see is a strong interest in healing or psychic development. By that I mean people come back from their experiences and they start doing Reiki or water dowsing or channeling or giving psychic readings. They become environmentalists, humanitarians. It really changes people. So I think that's another agenda. They're really trying to wake people up. I think they're taking the metals of our planet. That's something that kind of shocked me. I started doing a survey of UFOs hovering over mines. And they weren't only hovering, they were actually landing. Humanoids were being seen. The mines themselves are being affected. We've got cases of copper mines in Arizona, a uranium mine in Texas, which was apparently drained of uranium, a gold mine in French Gulch, California, another an iron mine in California. They're definitely interested in mines. So I think that's an agenda. They're taking metals. So, I could go on about their different agendas.
Do you think that at some point they're trying to get humans comfortable in the fact that there are aliens, and at some point they're going to announce their presence on more of a global scale?
For sure. There's absolutely what I would call a concerted publicity campaign. And I'm speculating here, but I've got very good reasons to believe that this is exactly what's happening and probably leading to open official contact. And the reason I say that is because if you look throughout all of human history, there's evidence of alien contact stretching back thousands of years. We've got cave paintings, we've got Renaissance paintings, petroglyphs, hieroglyphics. And what we're seeing now, since like 1947, really, the modern age of UFOs and the atomic age kind of coinciding exactly, is really unprecedented, which is large levels of activity, sightings, waves of sightings that are persistent. And so we have things like Gulf Breeze, or the Hudson Valley Wave, or a huge wave in Wytheville, Virginia, or over Belgium. There was a giant wave in France in 1954. One over Topanga Canyon in 1992, the Phoenix Lights. So these are sort of contrary to how UFOs normally behave, which is pretty evasive. In these cases, they're putting on a show. They're being seen by large groups of people. And one of my recent books was Schoolyard UFO Encounters. I found 100 cases of these objects hovering over schools at very low levels and showing themselves off to groups of students, 50 people, 100, 200, 400 in some cases. And these are the very low-level sightings, long-lasting. In 30% of the cases, they're actually landing. the Ariel School in Rua, Zimbabwe is kind of the ultimate example. But there's Westall High School, Crestview Elementary School in Florida, Broadhaven Primary School. In fact, half of the cases involve elementary schools. So that speaks towards them going to the youngest, most impressionable people on our planet in an effort to convince them that UFOs are real. And it's worked. The younger generation now pretty much universally believes in UFOs. So yeah, I do think there's an agenda to that. And I'll give you a little bit of a scoop here on my next book, which is coming out in like a month, which is Drive-In UFO Encounters. UFOs at the Drive-In, it's called. And this is about, just like schoolyards, I've got collected 100 cases where UFOs are hovering over drive-in theaters during the movie and showing themselves off to a completely freaked out audience.
Before I went into service...
Hey, we're trying to watch the movie here.
Before I went into service in Daytona, I was living there before I went into service, and we was at the drive-in, and I'm watching the old sci-fi movie Teenagers from Outer Space, and all of a sudden there must have been a complete light show of shooting stars going across the sky, and I thought we was being invaded then.
Hey, well, maybe it was. Because I'm telling, well, typically in these cases, these objects come right down next to the screen. No kidding. I mean, we're talking 15, 20 feet, very close. The objects are typically about the size of the movie screen itself. I remember my first case was one of my early cases. This lady I worked with, Claudia, it's like, oh my God, you're into UFOs? This happened to me when I was a kid at Paramount Drive-In. And it actually cleared the theater out. People panicked, which often happens. And I started running into other cases. I'm like, oh no, is this a thing? And yep, it is, for sure. And it's part of this agenda they have of showing themselves off in a sort of a grassroots, almost surreptitious way. They're not like landing on the White House lawn. We all know they almost did in 1952. That was another display. Clear display.
Well, with everybody having phones that you can take pictures with, when these things are that close, doesn't people think to get their phone out and take pictures of it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a most recent case of schoolyard UFOs was like 2018, I think, in Indonesia at West Nusa School. And there was this very bright object. It was afternoon or like around noon, and it was bright like the sun. And it was just this huge white glowing object right over the playground there. And she whips out her cell phone and takes a picture, and it just shows a blank white screen. It was too bright to photograph. There are only a few photographs in the schoolyard cases, none that I could find in the movie theater cases, because a lot of these took place throughout the, with the movie theaters, certainly the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Schoolyard, it's been constant since the 1950s onwards, but we're dealing with 50% of these cases are elementary age students. They're not going to have cell phones, or they're not going to even think of photographing them. Some of the high school people did photograph these. They photographed this UFO hovering over Hotchkiss High School. There's another case involving moving film, actually. This UFO was hovering over Sacred Heart Elementary School. 40 kids saw it, 3 nuns, and a guard was there, a police officer, William Fisher. And he had a movie camera in his car, so he runs and gets it and films this thing for like just a minute or so. But you can clearly see this glowing saucer-shaped object, and it moves off. And this case generated a lot of interest because of that film. I mean, the Air Force showed up, and another intelligence agency showed up and were very interested in this film, and they refused to even identify themselves. They were like Men in Black characters.
Wow. So do you ever get anything like that, Thomas?
I've actually had some of the drive-ins, but the one I had, though, was Chinese lanterns. Somebody, it was just a few years ago. we've got only like a couple drive-ins in our area that's even open anymore. A lot of them have closed down since, like I say, back in the 1950s, 1960s. But we still got one open, and somebody calls and says, "Hey, these orange globes were going right by the drive-in screen." And when I checked it out, somebody was setting off Chinese lanterns in the region. But it did wake a lot of people up, and I think we ended up generating like 2 or 3 reports off of that.
Huh.
Yeah, the Chinese lanterns. I hate those things. You have to really watch out for them because people will provide what you think are very convincing descriptions. And as you carefully kind of dissect their testimony, you realize. So whenever anyone says orange orb, fiery, you know.
Yeah, orange orb, fiery. And I say, what direction were they going? And you always check the wind direction right after that.
Right. You can recognize these things because they don't last very long. People may say, oh, they're darting around. I'm like, were they darting or were they kind of just zigzagging?
Exactly. I thought about setting some off just as a joke a couple times to generate some reports.
All right. I think it's about time for us to take a quick break. Any last thing, Barbara, Jeff, before we jump off?
When we come back, I'd really like to talk about Thomas's experience with meeting people on the ground after they've been abducted. It's like a simultaneous abduction, and also the telepathic aspect.
All right. We can do that. Just so you guys know, while we're out on break, you won't hear anything at all. It'd just be like dead air. But you'll hear me talking when I come back. You'll know I'm back on. So be about 5 minutes or so, maybe 6 tops, hopefully. So who takes us out?
Hello.
Okay. Why don't you take us out for a quick break in?
Hopefully it'll let me. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's returning guests Preston Dennett and co-host Thomas Wertman. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Para-X Radio. Our knowledgeable host and expert guest can help you find some answers and take a glimpse into the unknown. Para-X Radio, programming for the open mind.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello.
And we got our other co-host for tonight, Thomas Wertman.
Hello, hello, hello.
And we have our guest with us, Preston Dennett.
Hey there.
All right. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight and all those in the chat room. Appreciate everyone. And speaking of listeners tonight, Barbara, did you look and see where our listeners are?
They're coming from all over the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Spain, Belgium, and unknown.
And the unknown. Well, we know where that's at.
Yep.
Well, we
Outer space.
We always got that guy.
We got a bunch of listeners.
It's interesting because the UFO shows always have the unknown guys for some reason.
Yeah. So, all right, Barbara, you wanted to start some things off, so go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, Preston, in your new book, On Board UFO Encounters, True Accounts of Contact with Extraterrestrials, there are a few instances where you talk about people seeming suddenly summoned by these beings, and not necessarily as a verbal thing, but more like a telepathic one. And I'm wondering if that's a common case, but also with Thomas's experiences, are there situations in which people start to recognize others through an abduction experience? Like a collective, yeah.
Well, as far as telepathy, yeah, that certainly does happen. Generally, it's when people are already on board or being, perhaps visited in their bedroom, Greys will come in and speak telepathically. I would say that that's pretty much universal. I mean, I do know there's one lady I interviewed. She said, I actually heard the Greys talking, and it was a very high, squeaky voice, an unintelligible language. But most of it was telepathic, and this is what I pretty much always see. There's the case of Joe Gardner, whose case I described earlier. He had an experience when he was 13 years old, and this is when he was, taken on board and given a tour. He woke up because he heard his name being called in his head. Joe, it was his nickname, Jojo. It was this male voice over and over again. And he actually walked through the house looking for it. Realized finally it was outside, across the street. This object had landed. Telepathy is something I think that's been proven actually in a laboratory setting here on Earth. It's pretty well known psychic phenomena. I think most people have experienced little glimpses of it here and there throughout their life. But when it comes to UFOs, it's absolutely the rule.
And that would go across all the alien species. It's not just the Greys, but the Nordics, the reptilians all seem to use that same type of telepathic communication with humans. Yeah,
and there's one case, Andy from the Netherlands. He had this fairly typical abduction account. He woke up, his bedroom was filled with light. He thought initially that his brother had walked in and turned on the light, something he had done before. But no, he's on board a UFO. There's gray type beings. He's scared at first, but one kind of smiles at him, and he feels really good. He's got this intense sense of well-being, and they spoke to him in perfect Danish, telepathically. Everything's fine. Don't worry. We won't hurt you. So they actually, speak French to people who speak French and Spanish and so on. But it's telepathic. And it doesn't matter the type of race for sure.
So type of a universal translator if you want to go into Star Trek keys, but
it's almost as if these experiences take place in a slightly higher dimension or I don't know. It's very strange because this happens even between abductees who are being abducted together. Can read each other's minds. This is they're speaking telepathically to each other.
Really?
Yes, this is what Melinda Leslie described to me when I interviewed her about an experience where she was taken with her two friends, and they were all uncomfortable about undressing in front of each other and being physically examined, but they spoke telepathically.
Wow.
I know there's one case which kind of intrigued me. This is not a personal, it's one I read, where a guy saw a UFO and he's looking up at it, and suddenly he heard telepathically the occupants saying, "Oh no, he can see us," and it darted away.
Wow. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Henry.
I got a question from the chat room from Kat, and she wanted to know from the both of you, why do you think the aliens never have protective gear on?
Well, this is something we certainly, generally speaking, people describe the ETs as wearing a jumpsuit, a very tight, skin-tight bodysuit. And some say, I don't even know if they had any clothes on at all. I think that in these cases they probably do. Because people who've gotten real close to them describe this sort of skin-tight, usually gray, sometimes black, sometimes it's like tinfoil, silver, bright silver. But usually it's sort of a gray or tan jumpsuit. And I don't know what kind of properties this jumpsuit has, but we do not see ETs. Well, there are a few cases where I think at least Strieber described an ET walking to his bedroom with sort of a shield on its torso. And I know Ed Walters described the same type of thing. And I know a few other cases like that. But generally, I think it's because they are very mentally very powerful. And this is why they paralyze people in their presence. This is why they shut people off. so I put them to sleep, in effect. Disable them certainly on board the UFOs because they are weak. They are vulnerable.
One of the things I'd wonder, though, would be, out of the memories I had, when I went through regressions, that nothing indicated that they had clothes on. And the ones that they came up during my regressions were the grays. And the thought I had, again, just speculation, is were they completely like we think of being a human or humanoid? Or were they some sort of a hybrid, or who knows, maybe even robotic?
It's all, this kind of kept me out of the whole UFO field, the fact that all ETs are humanoid. That bothered me. And you just have to accept this is something that people are reporting. It's a basic humanoid. Eyes, nose, mouth, head, 2 arms. Number of fingers might vary. But even with the praying mantis being bug-like, it's still basically a humanoid form. And some look exactly like us. I honestly think the grays, and I've gotten this from a number of cases, are essentially human. Probably share genetics with us, but have suffered severe genetic damage, which has caused them to lose their hair and a lot of their facial features to become damaged. This is something that's certainly been independently reported in a lot of cases. Not only my own research, which I have at least 4 cases like this, where the witnesses are told by the Greys specifically that there was some sort of a war, a conflict, a disaster, and it caused genetic damage, and they lost their emotions. They lost their ability to reproduce, and this is why they're hybridizing. I've got another case right now with this lady from Florida. This is exactly what he told her. He says, we're not interested in taking over Earth. There's plenty of other Earth-like planets. In her case, she said, this is what the Gray told her. But to hear this same story from independent witnesses, and then to hear it from researchers like John Mack and David Jacobs, it's independent corroboration.
So let me ask, since they do have that telepathic ability and, people are seeing them as all sorts of things, including clowns or people with pinstripe suits on, then is it possible that even the Greys, the Nordics, the reptilians that we think we see are simply projections? And that's not really what they look like at all.
I have to tell you, I'm not going to rule it out. I don't think that's the case. When we're looking at this phenomenon, there's 15 cases in this new book, right? And what I found was there's one case in there, this man is convinced that these are demonic entities. Another is convinced they're angelic. Most are convinced we're dealing with extraterrestrials in the classic sense and that they are what they are at face value. But, Joe Gardner, he's like, I'm not so sure. I think this thing could possibly be wearing different masks. And this is not a new theory. Jacques Vallée is a proponent of this theory, Jerome Clark, a lot of prominent researchers. It's the second most popular theory after extraterrestrial. I still think the extraterrestrial theory is the one that fits best. It explains most of the evidence, such as crash retrieval reports and landing trace cases. And, if our military has these alien bodies, all bets are off. We know what these things are. And I think we do. So I think we're dealing with the extraterrestrials in the classic sense. And then when you see a Gray, that's what it is. Because so many people are reporting this. So many.
All right, I've got a bunch of questions already from the chat room. And the first one is from Tabby. And she wants to know, she said, ask either one of you, said, what or whose alien encounter or contact do you think is the most reliable and believable?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because all of them have sort of varying levels of credibility. I know I've talked to Kevin Kamen. His was a great case. This guy's a Navy medic. But probably one case that really impressed me was the Coronado Island UFO incident. I interviewed a gentleman and actually wrote a book, co-wrote his life story about where he had an abduction, which was verified by his wife, and it was a simultaneous abduction involving 8 people, possibly more, all out of this village, the Village Inn on Coronado Island. At the same time, he's got medical evidence to support this. He has apparent foreign bodies in his brain, verified by MRI. One of the ladies also had an implant put in her leg, and it was removed by Dr. Roger Lear, who is known for this, and it showed all the unusual properties of the other implants. No foreign body reaction, apparently composed of meteoritic metal, this sort of thing. So that case has really good evidence. But sort of, for me, it's the case after case after case that provides the best evidence, because it's clearly a real phenomenon. It's ubiquitous. It's universal, all across the planet.
Thomas, didn't you have something taken out?
No, they didn't take anything out. But what I did have is, when you're talking about, when I looked over some of the blurbs from Preston's book, one of the things about an individual was not in control after or during an abduction experience, if I'm correct on there, Preston? One of the experiences I went through, we went through regressions multiple times. And in one of the, just using the word scene that we went back to, I was on a table in a domed room which had complete curves to it. And I remember looking up and seeing this face of a gray roughly about less than a foot from me. And I'd had a number of experiences over the years, but all of a sudden, I felt like it wasn't a physical examination. It was almost like peering into my mind, examining what was on my mind, what was going through my mind, examining me that way. And all of a sudden, I could see into its mind. And when Barbara mentioned earlier about the hive effect, that's what happened to me. All of a sudden, I could see in a hive, and I could recognize almost where all of them were instantaneously. And that was the first time that I felt actually emotion from one of these beings. That it gave the emotion like this is not supposed to happen, and it lost control. And I was able to set up on the table and couldn't make me do whatever it was trying to get me to do. It was like now at this point I was the maybe 13-year-old kid that had been taken all these years, was out of control. Now this is the first time I'm in control myself, and I became like the kid that says, okay, now you can't make me do this. But after that experience, I had the feeling that they kept trying to shut me down by some means. But this is why on a number of cases and when I'm doing certain things, I've had experiences where I've been able to see what the witness is going to say way before they ever say it. I had a case I did in Puerto Rico where the woman's describing just a light going down through the countryside. All of a sudden, I had a vision in my mind of her sitting in a room, looking towards windows completely surrounding the room, and a silhouetted figure that was lower than the normal rooms in that same room standing. Then she goes, let me tell you about something else. She goes, there was a time where I was in my living room, and I said, describe your living room for me. And she goes, well, it was night. I had all these windows going around me. And she goes, there was an entity standing in front of me. I said, really? I said, how tall was it? She goes, well, it seemed odd because it wasn't at the same height I was. I'd seen all that a minute or so before she told me. Wow. I was visualizing everything that she went into before she ever said a word. And I've done that same thing on cases with missing time of fishermen. I was able to see things in my mind. And as a matter of fact, with Simeon Hine, who does remote viewing, we did an exercise, and I drew exactly what he had before he even started talking about what he wanted us to draw, what he wanted us to do. So it's almost like it's opened up a channel at times when I've done certain cases. I can see what's going on.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. I think this is an after effect of a UFO experience. It's a gift they give. This is what they've specifically told people. And because this sort of psychic ability, something I see pretty much, at least in 50% of the cases, people have this kind of ability to do remote viewing or give psychic readings or something very out-of-body travel. All kinds of stuff like this. One case that comes to mind is Gary from England. That's not his real name. He and his wife both have all kinds of psychic experiences. He has regular out-of-body experiences. He's been dealing with the Greys ever since he was a little boy. He remembers being taken on board. He's fighting with them. Actually, at some point, he had a Grey appear next to his bed. He jumped up and socked this thing in the face. Ow! And it was not happy. And another time he walks down the stairs, there's a Grey. He runs up to it and chokes this thing, grabs it by the neck, and its arms are windmilling around back and forth, and it's screaming at him telepathically, "Get off, get off, get off, get off." Another, apparently a Grey, came from behind and knocked him out. He woke up back in bed. But yeah, this Gary, he's had a real hard time with it. He's being taken on board fairly regularly. It's still ongoing. A great guy. But both he and his wife are apparently being involved. And they both have regular psychic experiences.
Well, to paraphrase a question in chat, why do you think they would give abilities like that to us? Is it just another part of the hybridization process that they're trying to do? Or is it part of that agenda of revelation that they're out there at some point?
I think they're trying to improve the human race. I think this is a theory, that I'm piecing together. And I think this is something a lot of people have mentioned before, certainly. I'm not the first one, but they've been genetically intervening for a long time. What we're looking at with humanity is a rapid rise in our own awareness and intelligence. We're living twice as long as we used to. There's a very interesting case from Florida involving a man by the name of Jim Law. He was being abducted, and he's by these Greys. And he had gotten to the point where he was over his fear and he could communicate with them telepathically. And he had I believe it was not an ulcer, a hernia. And he's like, "Guys, I've got a hernia. Would you fix it? Could you fix this?" And they said, "We know of your condition and we will repair it." And they did, which really surprised him. He's not sure how they did it. It was very quick. And he asked them, "Why are you abducting me? Why are you taking me?" And they said, "We are interested in your genetic propensity to live a long time." And he thought that was really interesting because his grandfather at that time was 106 years old and still very active, fully functional. So this kind of points towards, I think, what they're interested in, certainly. I've got a number of cases where people have what they call health upgrades. John Mack talked about this. One guy interviewed in, Vandalia, Ohio, said went to the doctor. He's like an 80-year-old man. And the doctor was shocked. He's like, "You have the heart of a teenager." He says he doesn't get sick. And he attributes it to his contacts. So yeah, there's something, I think, to their agenda to improve the health, awareness, and longevity of the human race.
Well, I hope they do liposuction because I want to be abducted at that point then.
And if they're going to give me a gift next time, could it at least be next week's winning lottery numbers?
If you're like me, why wait till next week?
Well, there was a case of a miner who was having lots of financial difficulties. He was taken, and the ETs advised him where to dig for gold, and he did and became very successful.
Wow.
Okay, I want to meet those guys.
Yeah. I have another question from the chat room. It's from Neil Bauman. I guess he's been abducted numerous times. And he has a question for Preston. How many cases do you know of marks that raised red bands or brands, perfect upside down triangle on the soft part of the thumb?
Well, as far as the location on the body, I can't say I've heard the thumb specifically. One very close to the thumb on the hand, a triangular, inflamed and red. One guy in the book, Kim Kamen, he's a mechanic for the Army, worked for Special Forces, never had any experiences with UFOs, did have one distant sighting while in the military. His twin brother had been taken by praying mantis type ETs, but not Kim. Until 1994, he's at his home in Bourbonnais, Illinois. In the middle of the night, he wakes up. His wife works the night shift at the local hospital. He wakes up and there's grays surrounding his bed. They said, "Get up, and you need to come with us." And he jumps up and goes with them. He was very obedient. He wasn't scared. It was as if he was kind of entranced. And they pulled him out into his living room. The back wall turns transparent. There was a giant craft hovering over his house. A beam of light hit him. Next thing he knows, he's inside, being physically examined. It wasn't really scary until this instrument started coming down towards his eye. That freaked him out. There were grays there. He blacks out. And, I'm cutting out a few details here. And wakes up the next morning, or not next morning, immediately. He's put back in bed. He wakes up immediately and looks at his arm. And there's this giant triangular, about an inch, maybe 2 inches on each side, red and slight, not really raised or anything, but definitely this very prominent red mark. He calls his wife, and he's freaking out. She's like, "I'll be home in an hour, or two. Hold on." And finally, she comes home. She sees the mark. He decides to go to the hospital. He's a vet, recently retired. He's going to go to the military hospital and see what they say. And he does. He sees a doctor, and the doctor just looks at this mark, listens to the story. He tells us the whole story, grays and everything. Doctor doesn't bat an eye and says, "Listen, it's not psychosomatic. You can either accept that this happened and move on, or you can freak out about it. I suggest just accepting it and moving on." I just was fascinated by that because he acted, the doctor, like this was something he had seen before.
Wow.
That's odd. So
the fact that the doctor looks like a mantis didn't... sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just making a joke.
Well, the second part of this was... yeah.
No.
Go ahead, tell your joke.
I was just going to say the fact that the baby... Dr. Reptilian...
Jeff, you're breaking up.
Of course I am.
Darn critic.
All right, Barbara.
So the second part of the question initially was about collective abductions. And I know you talked about the friends that were abducted together and had the telepathic experience. In your research, are you finding people that may have been abducted, they don't remember much, but like in Thomas's case, you meet a stranger at a convention and all of a sudden you realize that you know each other and it's from an abduction experience?
Yeah, I know of other cases like that. That's what happened to Anna Collins and Beth Jamerson. They were separated in different states, but were being abducted into a UFO together and later met as adults. That's a case, I think, from Bud Hopkins' files. They wrote a book about their experiences. So I know of other cases like that. I do think it's much more widespread phenomena. I remember very early on in my research, I heard a quote from allegedly J. Allen Hynek, who said that 1 in 40 people have had an onboard UFO encounter. And I thought, 1 in 40? No, there's just no way. That's way too many. I know 40 people. And so I started asking everyone I knew, family, friends, and coworkers, and I found like 5 people who would fit the bill, who had missing time, a face-to-face encounter, or a full-on onboard thing. So yeah, I think it's much more common. The Roper poll came out. I wrote an article about this. I called it 1 in 40. Sent it off to the MUFON Journal, and it was a year later. The Roper poll came out and found out it was about 1 in 50. I do think it's probably of epidemic proportions. I know Gary, the guy from England, had an experience where he was on board a UFO. There was a human-looking female next to him, and he turned around. She tried to stop him from turning around and said, no, don't look. But it was too late. He realized he was in this warehouse-sized room, and it was filled with people. They're all lying on the floor, mostly unconscious. I know of other cases like this where abductees have seen rooms just filled with people. And I'm guessing most people don't remember their abductions at all, period.
So these are mass abductions at any one specific time, and probably from different places.
I think so, because if you go through the whole enormous database on abduction cases, that's a detail that turns up fairly consistently.
See, I don't remember one like that, Barbara, but I was talking to another MUFON investigator out of the New York region, and she was telling me, she says, one of my friends was talking about going through an abduction experience, and she goes, she was describing, other people around her on board the craft, and she goes, she started describing somebody that sounded exactly like you. I said, what? 2 people like me? Right. And she goes, no. She goes, she described the individual's background. She goes, I know what your background is, and it sounded exactly like you. And she goes, what I did as an experiment, she goes, I got out some pictures. Yours was one and mixed it with a bunch of other ones, so she basically put me in the lineup. And she goes, she reached in and picked out your picture and said, this is the guy I was talking to the whole time. Now, I don't remember anything like that, but this is only maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago at the most, something like that. Did
you have any missing time then?
Well, sometimes it's hard to say as you get older.
There's a lot of stuff missing.
Time a lot, but I don't remember in that particular time. But it was most likely when I was sleeping one night. But there have been some times that there was one night I was driving home from work when I was working. And I remember leaving work, getting on a highway. And the next thing I know, I'm like 30 miles past where I was supposed to stop at it for home. Huh. And I don't know how I got there because I don't remember one single thing between point A and point B. Other than just realizing, what the heck am I doing? I'm 30 miles too far.
Wow.
I had that once happen to me with my sister-in-law. I still think we just overshot. But she's like, no. Because I remember suddenly she says, where are we? I'm like, huh. And we're taking the 118 freeway, and we're supposed to turn into the San Fernando Valley, and instead we ended up on the other side of Simi Valley.
Wow. Oh, this I just remember just leaving work, getting on the highway, and that was the last thing I remembered until, boom, here I am.
Wow.
And if I was sleeping, I don't know how I made all those turns.
I kind of did something like that one night coming back from one of the missile sites. It's about 15 miles from Minot to the base itself. And I don't remember anything after leaving Minot. And, of course, that was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, so I was pretty sleepy. I don't know how I would have drove that whole length and be asleep, but I woke up as I was getting to the base, and that's all I remember.
Yeah,
this was reading into one of your stories that fascinated me, and that is the lady with the car who would drive everywhere, and she had mechanics replace all the copper in the car with silver because she said they were tracking her by copper.
Yes, that's a very strange case. Which I included. I got to know the witness very well, James Santiago. He became a great friend. Unfortunately, he passed away of prostate cancer some years back. But what an amazing story. He was a nightclub performer, a singer. This is quite some time ago, 1980s, and was performing in Calgary, in Canada, and had a booking in Vancouver. He was just going to fly across the Canadian Rockies. He doesn't enjoy car drives. And turns out his makeup artist, her mother is a very famous painter, very wealthy woman and extremely eccentric. And that's the lady you're talking about. And she's became great friends with James. And she's like, I'm going to Vancouver. Why don't you drive with me? And he's like, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to drive with you. And just worked on him until he's like, fine, I'll go with you. And so they're going across the Rockies, and they're like 20 miles out, and she turns to him and says, do you have any change on you? And he's like, of course I have change. This was a very eccentric woman. And he's like, oh God, what's next? And he's like, yeah, I have change. Why? He says, well, if you have anything with copper in it, you need to take it out and give it away, get rid of it. There's no copper in this car. I've had it specially designed. And he's like, why? She says, well, I'm being followed by UFOs. And he's like, great. He had never really thought much about UFOs or anything really paranormal. He did see a ghost as a young man of his mother after she had passed away, and was a pretty spiritual person. But this kind of threw him for a loop. And it's like, fine. They pulled over, and he gave away all his coins. And to make a long story short, they're traveling through the peak of the Rockies there when she says, do you feel the pressure? And he's like, no. What are you talking about now? And she's like, oh, you'll feel it. We're about to see a UFO. And a few minutes later, he starts to feel this pressure coming down on him. And I thought this was very interesting because I've had a number of witnesses describe this to me, a sort of a paralysis that comes over them when they're in the presence of a UFO or ETs, usually grays. And this pressure just gets stronger and stronger until it starts to become really uncomfortable. She's freaking out. He's starting to freak out when suddenly this beautiful, he said, circular object appears right over their car and starts tracking them down the highway. It was emerald blue, cast this beautiful circle of light right over their car, and it was just a crazy experience.
Wow. I've got another question from the chat room from Tabby, and it's for Preston and for Thomas. Why has the Travis Walton case of abduction been downplayed in recent years?
I think it's because it's a classic case that has burst into the mainstream. It's very much like Roswell. I love the Travis Walton case. I've met the guy. It's obviously a valid case. I don't think we've heard the end of it. But yeah, I mean, I heard that there was a documentary that they put out recently on it. I know he's still on the lecture circuit. It's a great case, and I hope he remains active in this field.
I think when some people start downplaying things, sometimes it goes with the passing of times, and you're going to have those come out and voice their opinion negatively about something like that. But to me, I go back and look at that case. I agree with Preston. It's a great case. But when you go back and you look at not only, the man Travis, I mean, something to me definitely happened to him. Because over all these years, his story's never changed. It's remained constant. He's also said occasionally that he still has experiences going on at times. But then you go back and you also look at some of the physical evidence, like the trees in that region. One of my friends happens to have some of the trees that were taken down after that event. And the growth rings are way greater at the time when that event happened. How would those growth rings, I'm not an expert in trees, but how could you explain the growth rings, let's say growing, 3+ times faster during that time frame?
Yeah, I love those cases. I've got a case like just that in Santa Clarita, here in Canyon Country area. Southern California. I know Jacques Vallée has a number of cases where people have seen a UFO and it was shining a beam of light down, and the grasses there in that area grew at like 4 times the height. I did a whole study of this. There was one case where a lady had a UFO shine a beam of light down on her garden, and it grew at twice the normal rate of everyone around her, and they were all looking at her garden like, what did you do? And she knew what it was, but she just told him it was fertilizer. But this is definitely a thing where UFOs can accelerate the growth of plants, sometimes by just being in their presence, or sometimes by actually striking them with a beam of light.
But I think that, times that, going back to the original question, that you're going to have people out there, downplaying things. There's always going to be skeptics out there, taking things apart, analyzing things, taking apart bit by bit, and potentially misinterpreting some of that information with their own judgments. But Travis Walton, I think, is a great case. We didn't want to throw another one in. It goes back to Betty and Barney Hill, one of the very early ones. And when you look at her dress had things that were inconsistent on the clothing after analysis. And the inconsistency goes back to basically chemicals somewhat like deodorants, but in unusual places of the body. And her clothing's discolored in those regions. And you look at not only that, but you go back to correlating cases. One of the cases I worked, we found a similar thing on some fishermen who went through missing time. There's a case in Canada, and matter of fact, there's another case, I believe, out west that we found similar things on as far as physical evidence.
Yeah, I love the earlier cases, Sergeant Charles Moody, Patrolman Herbert Shermer, the Parker Hickson case, because they kind of established the framework that we still see. Thomas Bullard, he was a folklorist and a UFO researcher who wrote the first real comparative analysis and study of UFO abductions. And he outlined this whole structure that they have, and it's still true today, of this sort of kidnapping, capture, physical examination, a tour of the craft, messages given, and then return. It's the same pattern I still see in most cases. Otherwise, there's unique elements.
I felt left out. They never gave me a tour.
So basically, the type of abduction hasn't changed over the years. It's basically the same methodology that they're using decade after decade.
Yes, and people have asked me about that. Like, why are they still abducting people? Don't they have all the genetic material they need? What's going on? Don't they know enough about us already? And I have to say, yes, that would make sense. So I think what we're looking at is more of a monitoring program or a continuous genetic program, an intervention that's got a long-term goal, perhaps. It's hard to say. I do think that they're very aware of what's going on. And I've had cases, like once I asked a lady to go on TV, and she's like, sure. It was a little public access channel. And it was a couple of days before she was going to go on TV when the Greys showed up and said, don't go on TV. We don't want you to. They were angry. I thought, so wow, they're watching her that closely. I wonder if they're aware of me. And I think they are, because there's another case, actually the case in this latest book with Ramon. He is a Marine officer, and I was interviewing him, and he was describing his experiences, and he called me up like the next day and said, you know what, when we were on the phone yesterday, afterwards, after we hung up, my son came up to me. His son was like 4 years old, and said a UFO had landed in the street right in front of their house during his phone call. Huh. So I'm like, hey, they were eavesdropping on our interview. That's what it sounds like. I mean, that's what it looks like. I don't know. I mean, I can only speculate, but it's weird.
I got to throw this out here. Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
It also goes back to that statement I was making at the beginning, which is it almost seems like a doctor's office visit or patient rounds that they're doing, and are they checking up? Are you eating correctly? I mean, you mentioned they told her not to eat meat. Are they basically saying, okay, your technology, your science, and your civilization is doing this to your body? It's almost, like I said, like a doctor's visit.
Yeah, there was one lady who was cured of kidney failure. It was a complete miraculous cure. She told everyone it was angels, but it wasn't. It was these little brown humanoids who abducted her about a month later. You know, the healing took place in her living room. They abducted her a month later into an apparent craft and said, we were doing a checkup, and your kidneys look fine, but your liver, look. And they showed her a holographic image. It was all brown and looked bad. And they said, your liver is sick. You need to stop drinking Diet Coke. Specifically, that's what they told her.
Wow.
So they do give dietary advice. They told one guy to stop smoking marijuana.
Wow, okay.
It wasn't Mike Tyson, was it?
But yeah, other people have been told to stop smoking. They've removed tar from their lungs and said, look, this was in your lungs. Stop smoking.
Wow.
Well,
Have you ever known anybody, on the other hand, that developed medical problems after their abductions?
Yes. It's not uncommon for women to have gynecological problems. Certainly, some people their health has suffered with autoimmune disorders, this type of thing. So there is a negative aspect to some of this. I would say healings are probably a little more common, and that most of the abductees I talk to feel like their health is maintained. But some do suffer some horrendous problems. You know, they have diseases and they're not being cured. So it's very hard to make sense of.
And there's a great question in chat, and is there a lifetime relationship with these aliens? You're pretty much cradle to grave going to have abductions, experiences, etc., with an extraterrestrial.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think that's absolutely true. This is not to say that people won't see different types of ETs, but usually, yeah, people see the same figure. And apparently, Greys live quite a bit longer than we do. We don't have a lot of information on this, but some people have seen Greys who looked very old. I remember Whitley Strieber described something like this, and there's other people who had the impression that these beings live upwards of 200 years old.
You know, if they can do all that, why don't they, abduct a whole bunch of people that might have cancer or some of these other diseases and cure them?
I think there are curing people, specifically people who they're using for their genetic program. I've got 30 or so documented cases of cancer, healings of cancer. Some are very well documented. I think they know better than to cure everybody or even just hand over this technology, because likely we would abuse it. We already have overpopulation problems. It's a very difficult question to answer. Some people are being healed, and I think the only pattern I could find was, aside from people who are having regular contact, I did find something else, is that the people who most often report healings are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. This is a loose pattern, but kept hearing from social workers or from doctors and teachers and environmentalists and human rights activists and animal rights activists. And these are the kind of people, inventors, who are reporting healings. I don't know.
Wow. Our time is running right on out real quick like. And we got just about 2 minutes here before we start getting ready to shut down. Any quick questions, Barbara, Thomas, Jeff?
Well, okay, I'll ask you and Thomas both. When do you think that full disclosure will happen? Do you think we're going to see it in the next 10 years?
I don't. I think we'll see a steady, incremental process of disclosure. We're probably going to, at some point, see a fragment of metal coming from perhaps the civilian side rather than government. Government seems to be dragging its feet, certainly U.S. government. Yes, we had a Pentagon disclosure, but it was pretty small, quasi-official. It wasn't the Pentagon itself. It was former Pentagon officials. But does seem to be a great step. I'm not sure it's going to happen that quickly, because when I got in this field, there was already talk of it, and that was 30-some years ago. And it hasn't happened. But at some point, yeah, probably in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen right away, not unless it comes in the form of a tweet by somebody that letting something slip out all of a sudden. But hey, I don't think it will either.
Wow.
I think it will happen. I hope so. I want to see the Roswell craft in a museum. I do.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That's why I do this work. I think this is a very important subject. I think we probably have these crashed UFOs in our possession. I think that's what the evidence is showing us. We have this technology. We have healing technology. There's a number of whistleblowers saying that, yeah, we can cure tumors. We have technology from the ETs that they're using on a limited basis. So let's break this subject wide open. It's time to throw our attention, our money, and really work towards disclosure. Because once we have disclosure, I think open official contact will happen. It's really our own prejudices and our warlike ways that's preventing it.
Wow. All right. Great having you back on again, Preston. And you say you got another new book coming out in about a month?
Yep, On Board UFO Encounters just came out, and the next one is going to be UFOs at the Drive-In.
At the Drive-In. Well, I'll have to get me a copy, and we'll plan on sometime later this year getting you back on again.
Hey, that'd be awesome.
Okay, Thomas, why don't you give out all your quick information for people, and then I'll let Preston do that.
Okay, well, if you want to check out my podcast, go to Ufodacy, which is on a number of the different podcasting networks. It's on demand. And if you also want to reach out and contact me, you can reach out and contact me through MUFONOhio.com. All
right. Preston?
Yeah, I have a website. If you Google my name, it should take you right there. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. All my books are there. You can contact me if you have a story to share or a comment or question. I always love hearing from people. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
No problem. We always enjoy having you on.
And you can get all of his books through Amazon.
Yes, you can. Yeah. And so we got just like less than a minute now before we jump off. I want to thank everybody for listening tonight, those here in the chat room and those around the world. And thanks for all the questions. Great show. And Barbara, anything else you want to add here before we jump off?
Stay safe. Wash your hands.
All right. So until next week at the same time, this is Henry Foister,
Jeffrey Gould,
and Barbara Duncan.
And
Tom Wertman.
Thomas Wertman. And Preston Dennett. And we will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.